NESCO has been around for a couple of years. We are New England's Regional State Committee, and that means we are a FERC-approved, ratepayer-funded organization to represent the New England states, the collective views of the 6 New England states in regional electricity matters. We are governed by a board, and each member of the board is appointed by one of the New England governors. To date, I'm happy to say we've done all of our decision-making by consensus. Our purpose here is, I've just stated it, to represent the citizens by advancing policies that will provide electricity at the lowest possible cost price over the long term, but also consistent with maintaining reliable service and with environmental interests. And we focus on a regular basis on system planning and expansion and resource adequacy. Today, I want to talk a little bit about what you heard from Carolyn, and that is the transmission investment both in New England and elsewhere, where why there may be more ahead, not perfectly clear on when or how much, but there's certainly things to pay attention to in that regard. And then some of the things that the states have been working on to make sure that we have sort of the highest possible confidence in our planning processes, given that high level investment that you all make. This is a snapshot of transmission investment over time. Carolyn's data is better. A few of her graphs, but I put it up just to show the significant increase. I'll also say, as Carolyn noted, that given the way we allocate costs of transmission based on load, Massachusetts ratepayers fund about 50% of that investment, and that includes for projects that are being built in, say, the state of Maine or the state of Vermont, if they are reliability based. Now, the good news, I'll echo Carolyn, to that increase in investment is that I think the federal government has recognized that New England is capable of sort of meeting its own needs and taking care of things here. I think that's critically important to avoid externally imposed solutions that may not be aligned with what our interests are. This is just a quote from the DOE report last year, where they concluded that we've really demonstrated we can get it done. So that's sort of a counterbalance to concerns about transmission investment. It's not necessarily sort of inherently a problem. It's actually a strong upside to that investment. I put this slide up just to give you a sense of transmission investment outside of New England. As Carolyn noted, we've had to sort of make up for some lack of investment earlier in time, but you'll see that this is from the Edison Electric Institute. Across the country at their members, there's really been a spike in transmission investment across the country. So we're not alone in putting more money into the system. So if you look at those slides, you sort of say, well, is this about it? When are we done with this? And I think the short answer is not yet. There's a variety of factors at play that could lead to more transmission investment. A couple of words on some federal activity that we're keeping a very close eye on. Last year, the Department of Energy funded out of AARA money a significant planning process going on from the Rockies to the East Coast, the entire Eastern interconnection. Carolyn had a slide that showed you most of the United States. They're basically forming futures, considering hypothetical future policy options, and from that there'll be the development of about 3 significant build-outs of transmission. It is not necessarily a plan, it's analysis, but I think there's strong interest in various parts of the country to turn those analysis into plans. One of our focuses in that process has been to make sure that one of the scenarios we develop is the development of regional resources and regional ways to meet our own needs, so that we don't necessarily have to pay for transmission or be allocated a part of the transmission that could be built, say, from Kansas to the East Coast. And also, by the way, deliver coal and not just clean power. So we're working hard on that process. That's scheduled to conclude at least that initial phase in 2012. The other thing out there to keep a close eye on is FERC has issued a rulemaking, and order is, I think, imminent on transmission planning and cost allocation. And the point of that is to encourage planners to consider public policy in transmission planning. So today, if the ISO basically considers reliability needs, informing transmission plans and needs assessment. On a going forward basis, FERC is interested in making sure that they also consider things like the renewable portfolio standards and other policy objectives in that planning. And I'm going to talk a little bit more. One of our perspectives in that process is New England's interest in, again, trying to meet its own needs in its own way and look for the most cost-effective resources to meet our policy objectives. This is one of the ways we're doing that. Back in 2009, or 8, the governors across New England got together and said, can we take a really closer look at how we might develop our own renewable resources to meet our own needs? So there were two components of that study. One was the blueprint, which was sort of a policy analysis of how the states might work together to help facilitate development of our renewable resources. It identified a couple of ways. One is to try to coordinate procurement across New England, which is complicated, but we're still moving forward toward that end. And the other was some technical analysis that ISO New England conducted, looking at various levels of resource development from up to about 10,000 megawatts, but also at increments from 2, 4, 6,000 megawatts on and offshore wind development. And the bottom line to that report was really that New England is well situated to meet its own needs. If we wanted to build aggressively, we could actually export power. That isn't the goal, but the point is we're well suited to take care of our policy objectives if we choose that path. Following the blueprint, the states have been engaged in a couple of different activities. The governors adopted the blueprint and asked us to go back and take a closer look at the concept of coordinating procurement across the region. So we provided them a report in 2010, giving some preliminary ideas about how we might do that. Our most recent step was a request for information from renewable developers and transmission owners about resources that could be put into place and operational by about the year 2016, which differs from some of the earlier planning studies that takes a longer look on the horizon. We also asked transmission owners to give us any information they have about ways they think about reaching those renewable resources. In total, we received responses from about 4,700 megawatts of clean power. I'll say that more or less aligned with the earlier studies. About 90% of it was wind resources, and about 50% of that was located in the state of Maine. At this point, we're talking to ISO about ways its current tariff could support that kind of all-in cost, an approach that would allow us to look at the all-in cost of resources. In other words, we're not necessarily interested in working toward developing the lowest cost resources from a generation perspective if the transmission to reach those would be, put that cost over the top. We're really thinking about an all-in cost to have the lowest possible cost for consumers at the end of the day. So given the current investment in transmission and the possibility of future investment, the other thing we're doing is taking a look at increasing our confidence in the transmission planning process here. A couple of things that we care most about. There is a provision in ISO's tariff that requires the regional system plan to specify the physical characteristics of the physical solutions that can meet the needs defined in needs assessment and talk about market responses that can address those. We think that's an important piece of analysis for states to have as projects come forward seeking state approval and support. So we're been asking for the last couple of years for ISO to sharpen that particular kind of analysis in the regional system plan. We think it'll be helpful both to the states and stakeholders as we consider various ways to meet our needs. I'm going to just touch on this very briefly because Paul will focus on it further. We've also been looking at the way in which ISO New England considers energy efficiency investment in the planning process. At this point, ISO New England more or less for planning purposes, assumes that energy efficiency investment by states and consumers sort of ends at a certain point in time. And the only thing we know about that for sure is it's wrong. We're not necessarily looking for a super aggressive assumption about energy efficiency in transmission planning, but we also don't think it's appropriate to take the single most conservative approach. We just want sort of a balanced methodology. ISO New England has been working with us on that and looking at different ways that it could be done, and we appreciate that effort. I'll leave it at that because Paul's the expert. Okay. The other thing we're interested in talking more about is the development of a planning manual to sort of increase our confidence in how transmission planning is done in New England. ISO, the New York ISO and the California ISO have very detailed planning manuals that specify assumptions and so forth, and we think that would be a productive thing to sort of explore further with ISO New England to get to, again, just really maximize our confidence in how we do our planning. The other thing we've been talking with ISO New England about is trying to increase some of the information flows that come into and out of what they call study groups, and that is when ISO New England prepares needs assessment, there's a study group that really does the heart of the technical work that is generally limited to transmission owners. And in many cases, there's good reason for that. It's highly technical work. There's a lot of confidential information in those groups, but we think there could be some benefit to increasing, within some reason, the information flow at an earlier point in the process about the work that goes on in those study groups, as well as the solution study groups that then sort of report out their findings. I think it's really about just sort of early information to give us confidence in the ultimate product. And then last, I'll note another federal matter. FERC has just issued a notice of inquiry about incentives, what I call sort of bonuses for transmission. They began awarding incentives to encourage the building of transmission back in 2006. Some could say that sort of worked because transmission has been built, but there are a lot of questions about how that's implemented. You know, whether it's implemented in a way that is sort of on an as-needed basis, or if it's perhaps too generous. So the New England States as region, and I think individually, will be, you know, weighing in on that matter. One of the things that is of particular concern is when the transmission companies come up with cost estimates at the beginning of a process for a particular project. Those often escalate, sometimes, you know, quite seriously over the course between the time the estimate's given and the time the project's built. FERC to date has really allowed bonus returns even on the cost escalation part. So there's a lot of complicated pieces of those transmission incentives that we think are important to consumers that we'll be focusing on. And that's all I have. There's more information about NESCO and what we do at nesco.com.